Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everybody for joining today's webinar, What to Consider When Retiring a Legacy System. We appreciate you all joining us here today. And the first thing I'd like to do is take a second to introduce our speakers. My name is Shayna Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmel. And I am joined by our key speaker today, Gimmel's solution architect, John Kuvion. Now, before we get started, I have just a couple of housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen, and we will answer as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. There will be at least one poll question that you will see pop up, so please keep an eye out for that. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. So to kick things off, I have just one slide here to tell you a little bit about Gimmel and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Founded in 2002, Gimmel is a records, information management, and governance software company that helps you balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmel can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with our key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmel's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive suite of solutions include electronic and physical records management, content governance for SharePoint, document management for SAP solutions, file analysis, and migration. But without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it over to John so he can get started with today's presentation.
Thank you, Shayna. So let's start off with talking a little bit about what a legacy system is. And I think everybody knows what this is. So I did a quick search the other day looking at kind of what the real definition of this was, and it was interesting kind of the variety of different answers I got. But the Bing definition seemed to invoke the message that I really wanted to hone in on, and that's, you know, a piece of software or hardware that has been superseded, is outdated, and is difficult to replace because of its wide use. And we're going to talk a little bit about addressing some of those issues. But looking at legacy systems, outdated technologies, one big thing is, and it makes it hard to upgrade. The cost that you're paying for these systems now is exceeding kind of the value of the system. The features that you need really aren't supported. They're not being updated because it's an older platform. The solution is no longer meeting your current business requirements, whereas at one point in time it may have perfectly fit for your organization. Another issue is that you may no longer have the resources in place to support this system. As systems get older, technologists move on and start to learn new technologies and move out into new areas. And so you're left with having to hire potentially expensive consultants to help you support them. And not to mention just that, but you've got to upgrade. A lot of vendors require upgrades every so often to keep you in support. And that can be problematic and also add to the costs. And then finally, legacy systems don't normally fit with current governance goals because they can't really fit with the model that you've put in place on how you want to manage and govern your information. So the first poll question we want to ask is, how many different legacy ECM systems do you currently support in your organization?
We got the numbers tabulating in the background, and we'll be ready to share the results soon, John.
Wow. That's what I expected to see. It's not uncommon to see organizations, especially larger organizations or organizations that have grown through acquisition, to have a number of legacy systems, that maybe are not legacy in the definition of what we've presented, but in the definition that they're more than one, and you have duplicate systems, and you have to almost treat some of these as if they were a legacy system because you want to try to unify your information. So this is pretty insightful. So what are the challenges that typically will keep an organization from kind of pulling the trigger, so to speak, on a replacement or a migration? Uh, some of the top concerns that we hear and that we recognize as we're talking to customers is complexity. Uh, there's often a fear that it's going to be too hard. We just know that our system is so overly customized, and we've put so much work into it. It's just going to be hard. So, we're kind of putting it off. Well, we often find that good analysis and planning up front can help you start to overcome some of these challenges with complexity. Understanding kind of where you're coming from and where you're going to go are a big part of that. Secondly, time to migrate. There's often a fear that it's going to take a long time to migrate. And so there's a reluctance to get started with that, because once you start, you can't stop. And really, this is where the right set of tools to leverage in the process can contribute towards success with dealing with this challenge. Cost. Migrations, can cost money, but how much does it cost to do nothing? When you compare the ROI, and look at how much you're spending potentially on maintenance and license fees annually, as well as support and upgrade charges that you have to pay expensive consultants to come in. You really have to really look at this closely to make sure you're not missing something. And then finally, a big one, change is hard, and users don't want to switch and don't want to change the way that they do their work. So, one thing that we talk a lot about and do a lot in our projects and helping customers migrate is really stress the planning elements and the change management. You almost have to treat any kind of migration and system replacement as any other IT implementation, where you're going to impact many users, and you have to be aware of that, and you have to plan for that, because systems that have been in place for that long come with that baggage. There's a lot of users that are used to doing things their way, and when you rip that out from under them, that can be a big fear and challenge in the overall process. So where do you start? And we've talked about a lot of these, but we want to really kind of hammer these considerations. And at the beginning is the biggest part, discovery and analytics. You've got to look at what you have in your system and be able to analyze what you've got to understand what the requirements are for moving to your target platform. What do you need to do with that data in order to move to the next phase of your project? And that's so that you can start planning and executing on a schedule long before you actually press a button to do any migration. You've got to really understand what those requirements are, and then you've got to be able to plan it. Planning migration projects are no different than any other project. You've got to have a good plan, or else it's not going to be successful. Then finally, you're going to be able to start looking at a structured and organized way of migrating between your two repositories. And again, what I mentioned from the get-go, you've got to not leave change management as a last element of your process. It actually has to be way up front. You've got to start communicating with your users. You've got to start communicating your plans at every step during the process, not just towards the end when you're getting ready to execute on a migration. You'll often need, these users are going to have to play a part in the project in many cases, so you're going to need their help. So it's better to communicate early and often and make change management a big part of your overall plan. So let's start looking at the beginning elements of this. We talked about discovery and analytics. Looking at your data, looking at your existing system or your legacy system, so that you can understand what you have. What are you looking for? You're starting to look clearly. You're starting to look at the contents you have, your documents. You're starting to look at how much you have, so that you can understand what kind of space you're going to need in your target. What kind of formats do I have? What types of information am I going to have to move? What am I going to migrate? What am I going to leave behind? If you've got a system that's a true legacy system and it's been in place a long time, you're probably going to have a lot of information in that system that you may not really want to migrate. It could be old information that is already expired, or really should have already been disposed of, or it could be a lot of trash or a lot of redundant information. So this is where the discovery and analytics really can be a big part in minimizing the complexity of performing a migration. You get to make a lot of key decisions here, and that's going to play into the latter parts of your project. But looking at things like, am I going to get all versions, or I'm just going to get the latest or the last 5? What about cutting off by date? Maybe you don't want to migrate everything you have, but you want to get maybe the last 10 years or the last 5 years, and then everything else you just want to export so you can decommission this system, but you don't want to lose the data. So being able to perform those types of activities are critical, and plan for that. Audit trail, a legacy system is not going to have the same audit trail capabilities that a new system like SharePoint Online would have. And there's no way to stuff that audit trail into a system like SharePoint Online. So thinking about, exporting that and storing that for access is also important. What about metadata and folder structures? You've likely got categories and attributes or content types and object types in your old legacy systems, and metadata and attributes that you want to pull forward where it makes sense. So being able to run reports and analyze that and see where's my content located in the repository. Is it all financial data, or is it all engineering data? What content types are used the most? Or do I have anything defined where I only have a few documents or items using those types? Do I need to move that? You've got to be able to analyze that so you can know how to map that over to your destination. Our discovery and analytics tool can help with that as well. What are the differences between your source and destination systems when doing a migration? If you're going to replace or rip out an old legacy system, you've got to understand some of these aspects, because these are some complexities that can wreak havoc on your migration process when you get to that point. Are there any invalid characters that are valid in the legacy system but are not valid in your target system? This is often the case. Keywords, long paths. So there are limitations in path lengths for example, in SharePoint Online that don't exist in a system like OpenText. So you've got to be aware of that so that you can shorten and make sure that you're not going to try to pull that over. What about complex document structures like compound documents, project folders, things that exist in some legacy proprietary systems that may not exist in the same structure in your target system? You have to have a known way to transform that when you're doing your migration. So doing your discovery and analytics up front can help minimize the complexity involved in dealing with all these situations. You know up front, you can deal with it well before you're planning to execute your migration. And then at some point in time, you're going to get to your migration. And here are some key considerations, again, with migrating. And it's not just about the tool. Um, Preparing, once you've done that discovery and analysis, you need to start looking at, okay, what am I going to do with this? I'm going to port this over to a new system. Maybe that's SharePoint Online. And that's, one common direction we see everyone going. So is your information architecture ready in your target destination to support migration of the information you have into it? What about folder structures? Are you going to keep that the same? Are you just going to lift and shift? Are you going to do some restructuring? Are you going to want to flatten things out because you've got some really deep structures that are going to be too long? What about content types and metadata columns? Are you going to map? How are you going to map that over? Do you have the your content type hub, for example, ready to go, or are you going to have to create some net new columns and types to propagate through your site collections to be able to take data that you may be sending? And then what about security and permissions? We have in our tools, for example, a way to map over security and permissions from some legacy systems into SharePoint Online, but we don't often recommend that because sometimes the security and permissions in your source system are way too complex. They've gotten way out of hand. There's broken inheritance, and if you know anything about what Microsoft recommends, they don't recommend doing that in SharePoint. So we often try to encourage taking a fresh look and starting from scratch on security to make sure that you've got a really manageable model and you are really got your arms around what you're planning on doing there. Secondly, keep it simple. We don't encourage you to boil the ocean and do it all in one swoop. Our tools, for example, will let you slice and dice your migration into smaller, controllable, manageable chunks and batches of data so that you can migrate it one quicker, iteratively, have a little bit more control, be able to deal with challenges as they come up a lot easier than if you are working with larger batches. Timing and execution. You've got to be real with your expectations. Migrations take time. Moving data across a network still follows the laws of physics, and even though there's updated technologies to help enhance the ability to perform these migrations a little quicker, they still can take time. And you've got to communicate with your users and your stakeholders and be real about the expectations that you're setting. Plan for validation and user acceptance, especially if you're in kind of a regulated industry. You're going to have to be tracking, the custody of data from beginning to end. That's something that we always do, and our tools help with that by doing logging and tracking and tracing. We have a term for it. We call it a full fidelity migration. We move the data and track it all the way across. And when we're done, that data almost looks like it's always lived in the target location because we keep things like the dates and all the metadata intact from what it was and the way it was in the source legacy system. What about workflow and integrations that you may have? Workflow is oftentimes a big component in these legacy systems, and it's often widely used. So you've got to have a handle around how you're going to deal with that. Now, again, there's not an easy way sometimes to just pick up a workflow process and drop it into a new system. You're often really tasked with re-implementing these processes with a new set of tools, hopefully better tools than you had, to enable better information management in the newer technologies that you see today. And then line of business systems are are your legacy systems integrated with your ERP system? Do you have SAP plugged into your old content server environment? Then you may look at needing to figure out how you're going to plug that into SharePoint. And then finally, as I've mentioned a couple of times, the process is key. The process is the biggest portion of the success of your migration. It's 80% about people and process, and less about the technology. Even though the technology is going to do all the hard work for you, the other pieces are really, really important. And you can't overlook what's happening as you're doing this and trying to take an opportunity to increase your information governance. Shana talked about this at the beginning, information governance being about kind of maximizing the value of the data that you have while you're trying to reduce the risk at the same time, and it's a balance. And while you're taking the time and spending the money on retiring an old legacy system, and you're going to take your data and you're going to plug it into a new system that's going to give you so many more capabilities and enable so much better information governance capabilities and give you the potential to increase the value of your information, it's going to be up to you as to whether or not you take advantage of that. So while you're doing these migrations and these retirement of these systems, you can look at how can I increase the value while I'm migrating. So there's opportunities to add value while you're moving the data. So when you are moving it into SharePoint, for example, you can ingest and enrich the data by doing some automatic tagging. For example, our tool will allow you to add information in the middle of the process, and that's not impacting the source, but it's adding it so that when it shows up in the target, you've got that additional information that could be used for searchability. It could be used for records management and classification, findability, you name it. You're enriching and providing better value of the information. Reducing risk. So a lot of times people don't really understand what data they have in these old systems. They've been around for 10, 15 years. We talked about some of that information being potentially stale, or maybe it's expired from a records retention standpoint. Maybe it should have been disposed of. Maybe there's PII in there that you didn't realize. So this is also a place where you can take advantage of tools to interrogate that data and say, look, do I really want to migrate all of this and then clean it up after, or do I want to spend some time in the middle as part of the process and analyze this and make sure there's no PII? Maybe make sure that, if 30% of this is already expired and needs to be disposed of, maybe I don't migrate it. Maybe I just leave it behind. You're going to increase your governance and reduce costs when you eliminate these duplicate solutions. So that is giving you a leg up on your information governance goals as well. And then, of course, finally, by moving this data across, you're going to be centralizing your storage and increasing your information access and your ability to manage the information collectively from a records management standpoint, from a findability standpoint, from a storage, from a system standpoint overall. So all along, I've been kind of talking about these capabilities and talking about these best practices, and I just want to take a moment here to talk about our GIML migration suite, and that tool I've been alluding to several times during the presentation has been able to support the migrations and the conversions from these legacy systems, allowing you to leverage the Microsoft 365 investment that you have so that you can stop paying for maintenance or upgrade costs on some of these legacy systems. We can help you simplify your complex migration. So we have the tools and the analytics to be able to look at it and help minimize what could be a long and process migration and help simplify that. We can help increase information governance, as I mentioned, there's several places where we can plug in our tools in this process to help increase the value and findability of information and reduce the risk by eliminating some of these things that you might have concerns about. And then overall, just helping you to ensure that your migration is a success. Looking at how you define success overall as part of the process, and being able to do what needs to happen throughout that whole process, whether that's reporting and verification and validation, and making sure that we have a resolution of that, and doing an audit trail, and managing the chain of custody all across the whole process. And finally, as Shana mentioned early on, Gimel has a full suite of information governance products. We've been talking about the Gimel migration tool, which plays a part in legacy system retirement, especially for migrating to Microsoft 365. But we also have the other tools that she mentioned, for example, our Gimel records management, physical and electronic records management products. We've also got some governance products for SharePoint, which help automate classification and organization of content in SharePoint and Microsoft 365. And we've got document management for SAP solution that allows you to store your SAP content in SharePoint. And then finally, our Gimel Altitude product is a discovery and analytics product that can help classify and tag information. And this is where you could look at using a tool like this to identify, for example, PII that may be in your data and in your PSTs or network file shares, for example. And we have one more poll.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take over from here so I can try to use our time efficiently and ask some Q&A during this poll. But we talked a little bit about Gimel migration. If you're interested in a personalized demonstration of the Gimel migration software, just let us know on this poll, and then we will contact you after the webinar. Okay, John, so running into our Q&A for the last couple of minutes, I have at least 2 questions, it looks like here. So the first one is, how are links handled during the migration process?
That's a great question. As part of our migration product, we have what's called Link Redirector. And the Link Redirector works with the migration process to know exactly where the content came from and where it was placed in the target system, so that any links that may be embedded in Word documents, Excel documents, you name it, if someone clicks on that link and it were to try to go back to your old legacy system, we would intercept that, and it would redirect you to where we know that we put the file, whether it's in the same folder or a different folder. And we maintain a database of that. That doesn't actually go and fix the link. It redirects it while, if you're in the background going in through some process of changing the links yourself. There are tools out there to actually go into documents and fix links. But in the meantime, while you have both systems up and running, or after you've retired your old system, those links will continue to be redirected to the new repository using that.
Great. And I'm going to ask one more. I want to be respectful of time. If you want to just advance to the next slide, for those of you who might think of another question, our email addresses are right there, and you can email us after the webinar if you can think of any other questions we didn't get to. But the next question we have is, what kind of systems does your tool support?
Another great question. Right now, we have products to migrate from OpenText Content Server and LiveLink to SharePoint and SharePoint Online. We also support from Documentum to SharePoint Online, and we can also migrate from a file system to SharePoint Online. And on the contents side, we support both Content Server and the legacy LiveLink product.
Great. One other question snuck in there, but if you want to go to the next slide, I'll answer it here. Again, if anybody can think of anything else, you can also email us at info@gimmel.com or visit our website if you change your mind about a demonstration. To answer the question in the Q&A, yes, we will be providing a recording of this webinar. We're going to send it out between 24 and 48 hours in the form of a thank you email. So please keep an eye out for a thank you email. You will be able to access the link to the webinar recording in there. But that brings us to the conclusion of the webinar. Thank you everybody for joining, and we hope to see you for our webinar next week on what is hidden in your Microsoft 365 environment. We hope you have a great rest of the day, and thank you.